let's do that. First, an announcement, our event next week. We do not have a speaker, but we have a very special event that happens once every semester. It's the Energy Open House, where you just come in, enjoy very nice queso, salsa, quesadilla, fajitas, and meet and talk with your other students from other departments across the campus, but also faculty and staff, just to talk about what's happening broadly in the energy world, but also what we are doing as a university at the cutting edge of things. So please join us next week. There will be a lot of good food. It's a great pleasure to invite our speaker today, Professor Martin Kenney. Martin is a professor in community and regional development at the University of California, Davis. He's also the senior project director at the Berkeley Roundtable on International Economy and a senior fellow at the Research Institute for Finnish Economy. He has co-authored or edited 6 books and over 150 scholarly articles on entrepreneurship, venture capital, university-industry relationships, and value chain upgrading. 3 of his most recent edited books, Public Universities and Regional Development, Understanding Silicon Valley, and Locating Global Advantage, were published by the Stanford University Press, where he edits the book series on innovation and technological change in the global economy. He's co-editing a book on the Chinese innovation system that is going to be published by Cambridge University Press. He is receiving editor at the world's premier innovation research journal, Research Policy. It's really ranked #1 in a range of different categories. He has a PhD from Cornell University, and he has advised many different bodies, and his research has been funded by NSF, by Sloan Foundation, and many other entities. Please join me in welcoming Martin here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Varun, and thank you all for coming. I guess you were assigned to come, so not everybody was assigned to come. So I've been studying the venture capital industry, and I assume that everyone is somewhat familiar with the venture capital industry. From now on, I'll call them VCs, and VC, just to shorten it. But I'll explain just briefly as we get started what the venture capitalists do. I've been working on the venture capital industry and researching the industry since I wrote my dissertation, which was on the formation of the biotech industry, which was formed literally by the venture capitalists. And venture capital as a form of finance really goes back to World War II. And these are the financiers that did invested in Intel, Cisco, companies that are long gone, the gray hairs like DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation, you will probably remember, up until today, Facebook, Uber, Airbnb, etc. And basically what they're doing is looking for investments that they can make that will grow extremely quickly so that they can exit at a very large capital gain. Okay? So that's what the VCs do. And the VCs have repeatedly entered the energy sector and retreated. And I've seen this phenomenon now. This is sort of the 3rd wave that I'm going to talk about, where they've entered and then started to go, I'm not sure whether we should be here, and started to exit. So my personal history with energy, it shows you how old I am, is when I graduated in San Diego, I went to work at the San Diego County Energy Office after the first energy crisis, right? And then we wrote an ordinance mandating solar hot water heating. Then I decided to do a PhD at Cornell. I thought I was going to do it in sort of energy and society areas. I was a DOE consultant, but in '81 I started to say all alternative energy, because I was sort of on the alternative energy side. It was starting to go down. But I worked a couple summers at Brookhaven National Labs and was a consultant for them also. In 1982, I saw energy was sort of starting to do one of its typical decreases when you think about alternative energy. And I decided, well, gee, I'd better study, instead of energy, I'll study the venture capitalists. And so I switched and studied the venture capitalists in Silicon Valley from then on. So let me Let me state here, I believe in climate change, sorry. It is one of the most serious issues we face. There are business opportunities in the space. I agree with all of that. The government has a role. And I'll just talk about the United States. I gave this lecture a week ago in London, but so I'm just, but I'm going to just talk about the United States. And yet I will argue all of these things, but it's not a great place for the venture capitalists. And that's what I'm going to try to explain to you. So the outline is I'm going to start with the economics of the VCs. Then I'm going to start, what kind of technologies do VCs look at? The reality in clean tech of what the VCs are doing. Is this just some pretty basic data? And then the clean tech characteristics that I see and the problems with VC investing. And then I'm going to talk a little bit, I guess you're going to have Jonathan Silver pretty soon, a little bit about the government's role, particularly in supporting venture capital investment. And then I'm going to just say we need a dummy variable for Elon Musk. Any analysis of new startups needs a dummy variable for Elon Musk. Everything he's done in this space has turned out right. Okay, venture capitalists basics. They are not philanthropists. They're not focused on creating jobs. If they create jobs, that's fine. If they create no jobs, as long as they get capital gains, they're fine. And they're not focused on helping the world. If they help the world with a startup, they'll think that's wonderful. If they don't help the world and are successful, they'll think that's wonderful, right? They would rather, of course, do good things and make money, but if it's not good things, they need to make money. That's their game, okay? So what are the market characteristics that venture capitalists look at? They need rapidly growing markets that will become enormous. And best of all, no incumbents. So if you can kick the incumbents, if there's no incumbents to kick out, that's great. I mean, there were incumbents with Google, right? There was Alta Vista, et cetera, but they were easily able to kick Alta Vista out. Facebook, well, I guess MySpace was an incumbent, but relatively easy to kick them out. They need large markets, or they need large markets in which incumbents can be rapidly displaced or outflanked, which is a little bit harder. But Southwest Airlines, right, is a VC deal. That was a venture capital deal, right? The airline sector is not very interesting for venture capitalists. At particular moments, there have been opportunities there, but generally speaking, that's not an interesting sector. Chipotle was a venture capital deal, right? So they do deals across everything, but the areas where the VCs have done the very best over the longest period of time is IT, information technologies. The other space that has been very good for a very long time is biomedical. And then they've done deals in other spaces. Okay, what are the firm characteristics? The firm can't require enormous amounts of capital in the early stages. Right now, this is changing right now in this sort of Ubery kind of bubble that we're in right now. We're in another VC bubble. We see them about every 12 to 15 years. But you can't put a lot of capital down, right? The firm has to be capable of scaling very rapidly. Right? I'll show you some curves for Google. I mean, Google is like the perfect VC deal, right? The founders need to be willing to bring in management, right? Because when the VCs come in, they're going to want to bring in top-tier management, because what they want to take is a small firm, 10, 15, 50 people, and they want to build that firm to 5,000 people, and they want to do that in a matter of very few years. So they know that the entrepreneurs, not always, but usually, aren't going to be able to handle that growth, and you need to bring in adult supervision, right? So Google, they brought in Eric Schmidt, who'd been CTO of Sun, who'd been the CEO of Novell. So they brought him in right away and parachuted him in because he was the adult supervision, right? And the founders have to understand that control of the firm will be sold. If you're not willing to sell control of the firm, the VCs can't do a deal with you. Okay. So you need large, rapid payoffs, right? You have to have minimum return of 40% compound annual growth rate. If you're going to try to sell the VCs that you're going to have a compound annual growth rate of 15 or 20%, they can't do the deal, right? Because remember, most startups that VCs fund fail, right? 50% fail immediately, their total losses, there's nothing left, right? So you got to make up that, and of course they have to beat the hurdle rate that their investors want. So, large, rapid, a minimum compound annual growth rate, wildly overhyped public markets are very positive, right? That's a very positive environment, right? Because you can get rid of, Uber's worth 50 billion or whatever. Maybe it changed again. Maybe it's 75 billion in the, in the time since I did this slide a month ago, right? Wildly overhyped public markets because the venture capitalists want to sell that firm. Eventually they're going to exit. They're going to invest. Then they're going to take their 40% compound annual growth rate out in 5 years, and that's how they reward the investors, and that's how they make money. Okay? So, or they need acquirers willing to pay enormous premiums. Right? So the biotech model, generally speaking, is a compound is discovered at the University of Texas Medical School. You start a small firm. The VCs start to invest in it. It's a new cancer drug. They put 50 million in, and 6 years later, Big Pharma comes in and buys the firm for 500 million or $1 billion. That's sort of the bio model. So those are the models that they need when they're looking at an investment. Okay. One characteristic trumps everything. Will someone else, public or private, buy the firm for a high multiple, right? That's the goal here. And nothing else matters as long as you can do that, right? So now we're going to move to thinking about firms and firm growth. So this is sort of your perfect firm here is Google, right? So you start down here, and this is billions, right, of revenues on per annual revenues here, and this is the valuation, 70 billion about 12 to 13 years after the startup of the firm. You have a widening, right? So the firm is, as it's growing, it's becoming more profitable. That's what you want to see, right? You want to see those jaws. And if I went down to the early 2004 when the IPO was, you start to see that, right? This is the perfect VC firm. This is Facebook, and here down here we have Tesla. Right? Now Tesla's starting to experience that, but at a much, much slower growth rate than a Facebook. Right? And Tesla's a good deal in the energy sector. Okay, so what kind of technologies? This is a perfect technology for the venture capitalists to be involved in, right? This is the semiconductors, right? Doubling the processing at the same price every 18 months, and going on and on and on, right? From the very early days of the semiconductors, sort of the transistors and then the integrated circuit, a perfect industry sector to be involved in because you're getting massive additions of value. Here's Metcalfe's law, right? Same kind of connections law, same kind of growth curve. Here's solar cell research efficiency, right? It's going up sort of regularly, 28 from 16% in 1980 to a conversion of 44%. These aren't the kinds of curves that are going to get you very far with the VCs, right? This is ultimately, I think, the technological problem underneath most of clean tech. Let's see, go forward. This is cost per megawatt. Pretty nice decreases, but at the same time, integrated circuits would have quadrupled, right? So, and as you go down this curve, right, the value to be captured isn't growing. So what's the reality? This is the reality in the industrial energy venture capital, this Thomson Venture Expert data, and what you see is sort of a bubble right here, did well in the tech bubble, and here was that clean tech bubble, right? And now very little investment in the space. Right? And this cycle, if you go, I don't have the data back to 1980, but this cycle has repeated itself over and over in clean tech. And VCs have lost a lot of money in those spaces. This is the number of deals, which shows kind of a similar pattern to basically no deals recently. This is clean tech IPOs 2010 to 2015, and I redded the Elon Musk. Anything Elon Musk does seems to do well, but all of the rest of the IPOs have been losers for the investors. Right? So if you think about it, right, the VCs want to exit and get a high multiple. The investors, the institutional investors, right, they buy the stock because they expect it to go up. If the stock doesn't go up to the institutional investors, then they say, I'm not going to buy any more clean tech firms. So the venture capitalists say, I can't fund them anymore, right, because I can't sell them. So this is sort of the fundamental problem that underlies clean tech and venture capital that's been very, very hard to escape. So what are the clean tech economic characteristics that I think cause problems for it as a sector? One of them is it's not an industry, or not really a market, right? You've got solar, you've got bio, you've got wind, and people have done, I didn't bring the analyses, but people have done analyses of the patenting. And they find no cross-patenting, right? These are just different sectors, different knowledge bases, right? Well, what's the problem there? For venture capitalists to specialize, it becomes very difficult. Right? So VCs specialize in semiconductors. They specialize in social media, et cetera, right? But here, you have a difficult for them to specialize. So, what's another problem? Next step or supply chain building, right? So if you look at the semiconductor industry in the days when Intel was started, not only did Intel get started, Applied Materials, which made equipment for the semiconductor industry, got started. KLA Instruments, another equipment company. So you had a bunch of startups that you could do equipment startups where VCs could invest and they'd make a lot of money. The semiconductor software industry, Cadence, Synopsys, right? You could invest in there and you could make money. So you had sort of, if you think about an industry as it's developing, it's starting to put together a supply chain. If you can invest in various parts of the supply chain and make a lot of money, that makes that industry very attractive. If you look at the clean tech venture capital investing, and I've looked at it very carefully, I don't find it. Well, you had solar collectors, you had solar inverters, right? Solar panels, solar inverters, a couple other things, and then nothing else, right? So you didn't get that sort of cascade of opportunities. Joseph Schumpeter called that opening a new economic space, right? If you remember, some of you are old enough to remember the 2000 internet bubble, right? And you had Yahoo, and you had Excite, and you had eBay, et cetera, et cetera. You had a whole new economic space open up that the VCs could rush in and make money over and over and over. Those are the spaces that really attract VC, and VCs start to specialize, right? So they get a lot of knowledge about that particular area. We haven't seen that in the clean tech, and we haven't seen it repeatedly in the clean tech that was called alternative energy when I was young. We haven't seen that repeatedly where there's just deal after deal after deal, and you can follow them and you can make money over and over and over, right? Because that's how the VCs work. Okay, so maybe the problem is that all you're producing is commodity electrons or commodity BTUs, right? I mean, you could say that's what Google does. It just handles commodity bits and throws them around. But I think that this underneath is probably one of the big technical problems for the VCs. Now, maybe there's opportunities, and there were a number of opportunities in rapidly growing markets like China. So the VCs did a lot of clean tech investing in China, but I think even there, they're starting to pull back because it doesn't seem like there are enough opportunities. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so what is another problem? In clean tech, this is in energy, you've got a highly regulated industry, right? That's always an issue. Now, in pharmaceuticals, you have highly regulated industry too, but ICT is basically not very regulated. So you have lots of volatility. If you're depending upon the government, this creates a new set of risks. Government today decides we're going to put prices of energy up, feed-in tariffs are going to be up. Tomorrow the government says, feed-in tariffs, we're getting rid of them. That's a new set of risks, right, that the VCs have to think about. And in the energy space, that has been a problem for the VCs, is because government policies can change. They might change, right? Carter pushed a lot of alternative energy. Mr. Reagan got in, bang, it was all gone, right? So you'd invested thinking it was going to be sort of the Carter regime, then you got the Reagan regime, boom, things are different, you got screwed, right? In the ICT space, that doesn't happen as often. So you get other kinds of problems. So these problems are, unless you can be absolutely guaranteed that government policy is not going to change, you're just putting new risk into the equation, right? And as a venture capitalist, you're always dealing with risk, right? You're dealing with the risk of the technology. Will it work? You're dealing with the risk of the managers. Are they any good? Is the manager going to go crazy and go running out the door screaming, right? Is the market going to be there? Is that market going to appear, right? And then you throw in something else like government risk, and you've just got another problem. So what have we seen in the VC clean tech space this time around? We've seen a few home runs, the Elon Musk dummy variable home runs, right? Some software deals that have been pretty good, some devices and instruments that have gotten out pretty good. So a few firms have gotten out pretty good. That means they've gone public or been acquired. So we've seen some deals, but not many. But some home runs are Google, right? Facebook and Google, that's what I call, that's venture capitalist home run, right? You put in $1 and 6-7 years later, you take out $150. For every dollar you put in, you take out $150 in 6 years, right? Anybody likes that kind of investment, right? Okay, so what have we seen here? We've seen the limited partners, right? The investors in the venture capital firms have taken a beating. They haven't gotten their money back, right? That, when investors don't get their money back, they tend not to give more money. Okay, the generalist VCs are leaving the markets. The specialist VCs have to produce returns. They're having real difficulty producing returns. And the VC market is very cutthroat. I tell my friends in Europe they don't like this, but in the VC market, if you're not a good investor, you die. And that's a good thing. My European friends hate that because they don't like the Darwinian aspect of this. But it's Darwinian, right? I mean, the Bay Area is totally Darwinian. The VCs are Darwinian, right? The corporate VCs may continue. So for those of you who are studying clean tech and VC, my guess is that what will probably last are the corporate VCs. Maybe the BP venture capital, et cetera, those folks. GE venture capital will do some of this. Google venture capital is doing a lot of clean tech deals, right? So that'll be really interesting to watch. Whereas the generalist VCs are getting out. Google's still doing some clean tech deals. So the corporates might stay in because they have other goals in mind, right, rather than just returns. Let me just go briefly through government policies. So you're going to have Jonathan Silver here. Andy Hargadon and I wondered whether that strategy of the government coming in with large investments to back Tesla, Solyndra, Fisker, A123 batteries was a very wise idea. We argued, it took us a year and a half to get the article published. By that time we didn't look prescient anymore because California Management Review, one of the reviewers, hated the article, which was basically the presentation I'm giving here. It was somebody who was, I think they sent it to a clean tech venture capitalist, and he was just terrible. But he didn't like it. We ended up right, but he didn't like it. Okay, so what are some of the problems with massive government subsidies to some venture capital financed firms, right? We believe that it truncates the competition process in which the best, we hope, I mean, we believe, if we believe in the Darwinian nature of capitalist competition, that that if you give a lot of money to one, you may sort of favor them rather than letting the competition winnow them out, right? Solyndra got a lot of money, 500 million, and basically lost that money. The VCs and entrepreneurs spend time lobbying the government instead of building firms. Right? If the money that if you can get 500 million from the government, right, you better lobby. That's real money, right? So you take entrepreneurs away from what they should be doing, which is building firms, and get them lobbying government, right? Getting them onto social welfare is welfare for the entrepreneurs, when in fact what you want is you want the entrepreneurs that are no good, you want them to die, right? You want to clean out. You get lots of people who believe they have an idea. What you want to do is get rid of 90% of them because the ideas are bad, right? 90% of all of our ideas are bad, except professors. Ours are 100% good, but beyond professorial ideas, right, in the marketplace, right, you want that cleansing process. Okay, so they're not building their firms. Then you have politicians joining VC firms. Bringing Washington ideas, that's a typo, corruption. It's ideas, bringing Washington-style ideas to industry, right? So you put Al Gore onto your venture capital board, you put Tony Blair, George Bush, I don't know, whoever, right? These are brilliant entrepreneurs, but I'm not sure that they really help build firms that much. But anyway, okay. So the final thing is when particularly the government starts loaning, making big loans to venture capital financed firms, right, which 50 to 60% are going to die because that always happens, right? The government gets a total loss, and if the firm succeeds, since it's a loan, the government gets its loan back, right? It makes no sense, right? Economically, this doesn't make sense. But anyway, that was sort of the policy that was developed. Right here are just a few of these federal loan guarantees to VC-funded firms, right? These are VC-funded firms. They should compete. They don't need government money, right? And this is A123, the loan, and then in parens is the amount of money the government captured. I mean, that's pretty good, right, actually, to recapture from Solyndra 25 million. Pretty good in the sense that many of these are just zero. So loan guarantees pay for failure and no upside on success. It doesn't make very good sense because it's not the way the VCs work. It's not the way this sector is supposed to work. Okay, the recent hype about the Success Program is because a lot of it went to startups like Ford and Nissan. And the loans. So, okay, so what is the principle here? The principle is the point, right? Loans work for established firms, but loans can never work for startups because the losses are too high unless you believe that the government can pick winners, right? And it can sometimes. I'm not saying it can't, but it's very, very It's very difficult to pick winners in spaces like this. Okay, so to conclude, where are the VC opportunities in clean tech? There are opportunities. And I think it's going to be in software, cloud computing, devices, IoT, Internet of Things, smart grid. Probably in the smart grid space, it may not be to organize the whole grid, but it may be more like Nest, right, which Google went in and bought for $2 billion. Nest was the smart thermostat, was a VC-backed startup, right? So there may be pieces in the smart grid, in the Internet of Things, that entrepreneurs from universities, from other firms can go out from firms, leaving firms and starting new firms, may have opportunities for VC investment. Probably, I don't think that most of them will go public, but my guess is that there'll be opportunities where you'll have a Google or a General Electric that's trying to organize some of these spaces, will go in and buy you at a very nice multiple. So it isn't that everything's going to fail, but I think it's back to the old basics where the VCs do really well, which is in ICT. And it's going to be smart electrons controlling dumb electrons. Well, in that smart electron space, there may be some really interesting opportunities. And that's where you're seeing the venture capitalists play now, is in these kinds of spaces. Okay, there could be game changers, right? We don't know what's a game changer. I wouldn't bet my bottom dollar on this, but let's say Saudi Arabia explodes, right? And all of a sudden oil prices go through the roof, then there may be new opportunities that we can't see now, right? And the stock market for clean tech firms may go like this, and if you've got a clean tech firm, you can feed it into that market, whether it's a good firm or not. Oh, well, it didn't turn out that way. Awareness of global pollution, right? It seems hard that we're not aware of this, but it doesn't exist, so we don't need to think about that anymore. Serious global carbon tax. I'm sorry, you shouldn't laugh, but no, because this would start to change the market space within which entrepreneurial firms would have a good chance. Clean tech firms would have a good chance to change the economics. Stock market becomes interested in clean tech again. Right? The stock market's interested, and if you can get a good exit, it really doesn't matter, right? So the stock market, and we've seen these waves before. So it's all possibilities. So, bottom line, about 3 or 4 years ago, I think it's not as hyped up, but 3 or 4 years ago, a lot of people, particularly in Europe, were thinking that the venture capitalists were the solution, would find the solutions to the global climate change crisis, et cetera, and that's kind of an easy way out, right? You don't have to have policy. If the VCs will do it, that's great. Right? You don't have to make any tough decisions if the VCs can find opportunities. The problem is they couldn't. So I think that we're going to have to look somewhere else for other financial vehicles to address global climate change and to address the kinds of things that will need to be done to address it. So my answer is that I just don't think the VCs can do it. I don't think that private sector market solution will work. Other people are experimenting in Europe and other places on new financial mechanisms to finance change, but that is that. Great. And these are books from my book series at Stanford University Press. That's John Zeisman, Mark Huberty. Mark is at Google, and that's Andy Hargett on sustainable innovation. I've got a series, and we're doing books on this topic. Anyway, with that, I'll end.
While we get some questions, let me make a quick announcement. Today's talk is co-sponsored by Earth to Last. It's an undergraduate student organization here that focuses on clean tech, resource sustainability, and conservation. And there are a bunch of those students in the audience today. They're spread around, but that's Marshall Huggins. He's one of the guys. But this is an event where We are open to co-sponsorship with student bodies. Please come in and tell us about an event or a talk that you're interested in, and we'll be happy to work with you to bring in your members here and catalyze any sort of interaction you're interested in. Thank you, or to last.
Thank you. How does DARPA and ARPA-E projects fit into this sort of paradigm? Because I see a certain similarity of throwing small money into speculative ideas, but where does that go?
So small money into speculative ideas. We know the SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Grants, we know that that works, right? It allows bootstrapping, it allows experimentation. Right? So those are the kinds of ideas, if the state, if the government is going to do something, I think it's smaller money in lots of ideas and see what works and see what can be bootstrapped. Because I think there are opportunities in this space. It's just they may not be the opportunities for the VCs, but there may be lots of opportunities for bootstrapping, government grants, ARPA-E, SBIRs. If you're in the university and you're commercializing something, you get $1 million relatively easily. And it's non-diluted. It doesn't dilute you. You can get started and you can experiment and see if a market starts to open up to you. So those would be the kinds of kinds of government interventions I like a lot better than $500 million for Solyndra. I'd rather have $500 million grants than big $500 million, because I think that if you're putting $1 million on, it's a diversity and risk spreading kind of strategy, right? You lose here and here and here, but you may have a couple winners, right? It's a portfolio strategy. So that's a much better way, I think, for the government to approach the kinds of issues that we're addressing, we're looking at here. Yeah, great question.
All right, thank you for the talk. So my question is, we saw the difference between the linear path for the growth rates for renewables versus the kind of hockey stick for Google. So do you think there's a critical mass that clean tech needs to hit where it would take off? For example, like if we started the death spiral for utilities or something like that.
I don't see the space as ever getting that kind of hockey stick growth. I don't see the kinds of technologies underneath it that would drive it. I mean, outside of ICT and the smart grid, maybe IoT and things like that. I just don't see it, and I don't think you get to a critical mass because I think the way the underlying technology evolves isn't going to take you there. So I don't think will we create an ecosystem that's powerful enough such that then it'll start to spin off firms that a VC-like intermediary can invest in. Because so much of this stuff is mechanical, it's physical, it's not like a biopharmaceutical. I have a new drug that will cure cancer. If I have cancer, I'm willing to spend as much money as my insurance company will spend to cure my cancer, right? But a clean tech, so you make some more electrons for me. Even if they're clean, will I pay 100 times the cost of a dirty electron? Or do they still use BTUs, or am I showing my age here? But anyhow, a BTU, right? A clean BTU versus a dirty BTU. You're going to spend 100 times for that? No. So I don't think that's the way it's going to go. You could have a cluster of firms that are doing something. Let's say the Danish wind turbine industry wasn't VC financed, it was bootstrapped. Right? And it was a cluster of firms, they were all interacting, many of them did well, but there was no opportunities for VC in any of that space.
I'm over here. Thank you for your talk. I had a question in terms, you mentioned Google still kind of becoming a VC and still interested in the clean tech. And I'm wondering if you have any hypothesis, or if you've talked to people that know, is this kind of their thing of saying we care for the environment, or is there other incentives that they're looking at to...
I'm from California. Do no evil. No. Sorry, that's Google, right? Do no evil. Okay. Oh, sorry about that. No, I mean, they have so much goddamn money that they can do whatever they want. And, you know, you can complain as a stockholder, but they have a special 2-share system, and they'll tell you, you know, too bad for you, right? And they use a lot of energy. And I really do believe they care. I'm being facetious, but I believe they care. I mean, these are very smart people that see that the world has troubles, shall we say. And so I believe they really do care. And they love innovation. And, you know, the people with new ideas on how to do things, they're willing to invest in that. So I think basically they've got a lot of money and they really do want to do good. And, you know, it also looks good that look what we're doing. Yeah, our data centers are eating 2% of all the electricity in the United States, but we're trying. And the other thing is, and I'm writing a paper now, a hypothetical paper, is I think they're trying to reorganize the grid. I think they want to take the grid, the other big network. I think they want that network, right? They generate electricity, they can trade electricity, they have Nest, they have the pipelines, they have the software people, right? And as we go to a smart grid, they're very close with Elon Musk, with Tesla, and Tesla's going to have, if Tesla succeeds, they're going to be distributed storage, right? The first time you could have distributed storage. All that's going to need software. Who better to do that than your friends at Google? So, I mean, that's a hypothesis, and we're just sort of playing with it. But when you look at what they're doing, they may just be playing around, but they may have, you know, nobody knows what Google's thinking. They may have bigger plans in the energy sector, right? Because it's an interesting sector. I mean, there's billions and billions and billions of dollars in this sector. So it's interesting.
Hi, thank you for the talk. Very, very interesting. And very related with the previous question that you said that the lobbies, having lobby here is not a good idea and go against the Darwinian. Yes, but the traditional energy companies, oil, coal, they put a lot of money in lobbies. So maybe, what about these people from Google or the new energy people can fight with lobby, or it's not a good idea? What do you think about it?
Well, I mean, the energy sector has a pretty strong lock. I don't know if Google's going to lobby against them. I mean, I have a little, so it's a little bit uncertain. I mean, what Google has been lobbying for is the ability to trade electricity, to start to enter the sector, to open pieces of the sector up. But I don't think that they're ever going to be a powerful enough lobby to overturn the energy sector. How they're going to do it, if they're going to do it, is they're going to go around through software and the network. They're going to go around the entrenched parties. In the same way as with Android, they went over the top of the telcos, right? They just went in over the top of the telcos and made the telcos dumb pipes. Right? So Google would be more than happy to make all of the electric companies dumb pipes and have the software that controlled the system. I mean, that's a hypothesis, right? And could they go over the top? I mean, that's what Google does. It goes over the top.
Hi, thank you. One thing that I think sort of interesting from what you're saying is sort of underlying how the energies market is in some ways sort of just a homogeneous commodity, and it's really hard to sort of make that something that people care about a difference for. And just sort of by way of analogy, I wonder if in some ways Tesla's success is because it's instantly recognizable, it can build hype, it's very marketable, and whether the same way that Intel was able to sort of use its increasingly faster processors as sort of a selling point for all the products that it was embedded in, if there might just be like a sticker or some sort of like marketing or branding of certain types of energies with different market-facing components. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. In Europe, they actually have that. You can buy greener, I mean, I spend my summers in Finland, not the winters, just the summers in Finland, and you can actually buy greener energy, right? You say, okay, I'll pay a little extra, and this is coming from hydro or from something else. How much will they pay, right, is all will people pay. And I think you got Tesla right. Tesla's got this beautiful car that's, you know, like a work of art. I mean, how much will it really contribute over the long run is a little hard to say. I mean, but yeah, if you could build a much nicer car or device, right? Some people liked the Nest device because it was so cool looking. I'm not sure how well it works, but it was kind of cool looking, right? So that's an opportunity. Is that enough of an opportunity to overthrow the whole system of how we buy electrons? I doubt it. Again, I don't think that's what Google would want to do. What Google wants to do is come over the top and reorganize the system to make it more efficient and keep, you know, that alpha of what it, you know, it's the efficiency that it added. But that wouldn't be so much a coolness factor, that would be technical.
Yeah, I just thought this was absolutely terrific and totally spot on, and I hope all the young people in here take it totally to heart, because I think you're dead on in terms of venture capital. I guess the question that I would have, or that I would pose is, so recognizing that you're not going to be, you know, making your money like Zuckerberg, you know, doing Facebook, you know, you still want to innovate in the clean energy space. So are you sufficiently versed in other models that might actually work and allow them to get the funding that they would need to introduce some innovative technologies that Google can then swallow up and turn into whatever they want to turn it into?
You know, I haven't looked at sort of that vast group of firms out there that are trying to start small and build firms, entrepreneurs out there. I think but I do believe there are businesses there, good businesses there. But you know, I haven't researched the financial models for that. I mean, the first thing, of course, is an SBIR for sure, right? So the SBIR can carry you. Of course, it has to be an innovative firm. It can't just be a Me Too firm there. But that's one way. I don't know, or you know, does DOE or I don't know enough about the other financial models to be able to tell you. You know, some of in Europe, you're getting firms that are starting and they're bootstrapping themselves. They're producing a superior product and they're bootstrapping themselves and building sort of gradually. And that seems to be working, you know, but that's a long time German, Northern European model, is you build a firm making something and you just bootstrap it.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Bootstrapping would be the way that I'd pitch it if I was actually trying to get some investors into it.
Oh, yeah, and then, of course, there's the vast angel market, and there's crowdfunding markets. You know, crowdfunding it's not going to get you 50 million, but crowdfunding can get you $1 million. So there's new financial instruments, I'll call them that, right? Both Angels List, which is more of a real angel-y type of thing, but on the internet, and then there's you know, Kickstarter, et cetera, and I've had a couple of students who've they haven't done clean tech deals, but they've raised $200,000, and one guy is Clean Bottle, one of my students, and it's a water bottle that's he raised $200,000 for, and he's got a business. So certainly there's a lot of those kinds of opportunities. So there's more capital out there right now in different places that were never accessible before because of the internet. So that's, yeah, so there's other ways of raising money, I think, that can work. Yes.
Okay, thank you, excellent talk. So I thought I saw that you said that this is the third wave, or we've had 3 waves of VCs attempting and then backing out. And my understanding is they tend to go in herds. Are there any interesting characteristics or differences how the herd behavior changed over those 3 different successive generations? That would be interesting. Did they get in some way less herdish or more fattish or whatever? And then secondly, it seems like
Interesting.
it has to be more entrepreneurship that's going to be innovation by companies, sponsored by companies that have sufficient resources, either technological, capital, leverage of balance sheet. And the third thing is that I think one of the main contributions of Tesla will be the ability to have competitive response from the other automakers that are established. That'll have a ricochet effect. That'll be very positive. But anyway, let me get you back to the first herd mentality morphic.
So, well, this, I think each one, so the herd mentality, the first one sort of in 1980, was really sort of a high-tech solution. There weren't a lot of VCs, not a lot of money. It sort of it came and went. I mean, once Ronald Reagan came in, it was gone. It was going poof, like that. And they tried very high-tech solutions, and particularly in the wind space, where the Danes and the Europeans tried much more low-tech solutions, and that worked out much better. This last one was really driven by social concern, right? So CalSTRS, probably your Texas pension fund, just went in and gave the VC monies because it was great social concern. They thought that they could leverage this. So I think this one was, in many sense, the one that was driven most by the institutional investors believing they wanted change, particularly the public institutional investors. And Vinod Khoshla's still in. Some of the people are still in, trying to make a go of it. So I think that this one is quite different, because this one was really driven by public institutional investors versus the earlier ones, which were more opportunity driven. Particularly the first one was, of course, the high price of oil drove it. So let's see. So the second question was? Entrepreneurship. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're seeing that particularly in Europe, whereas as the Mittelstand in Germany has become aware of environmental issues, they're using their incredible engineering skills to make their machines more efficient, et cetera, et cetera. So they're using the internal skills. GE is, of course, another company that's doing a lot of this in its engines, right? And it's combining this with the Internet of Things kind of stuff and the software. So you're seeing that the GEs, the Honeywells, and all of that internally driven because they're responding to the pressure that they believe is going to come on them around global climate change, regardless of the price of energy. I think many of the firms, of course, Volkswagen was doing its own little internal platform shenanigans on its software. So yeah, so I believe that that's probably where we'll see the biggest changes. It'll be driven by these firms either for efficiency purposes or what they believe is coming down the road, the pressure from us, the consumers, the global population. The third question, sorry.
Oh, just Tesla. I agree with the Elon Musk on the variable. I think that one of the things that'll be, even if Tesla succeeds or fails, one of their most meaningful impacts will be A, redefining the possible repeatedly, and secondly, engendering serious competitive responses by otherwise companies that wouldn't get off the ground.
I think that's right. I mean, he's already forced them to think about this and to do some things. Now, how far they'll go is a different question. So, it would be nice if the VCs continued to try to disrupt these sectors to force incumbents to do things. But because of the returns that the VCs have gotten, I don't think they can do it. They've stopped doing it.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. There was one thing that I was kind of confused about and wanted to clarify. You defined the current VC opportunities very well. You boiled it down to 4 main things. One thing I was curious about is why you feel that batteries wouldn't be one of those possible areas for investment, because kind of like from where I'm standing, it seems like we don't really understand battery science completely yet. There's definitely a huge possible improvements, and there are definitely a lot of buyers like phone companies, Apple, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So why, well, so there's the incumbents that are pretty good, like Panasonic, that will be hard to drive out. Unless you get unless you get a 10x improvement or a 5x improvement, it's going to be very hard to make a battery company successful, right? Because one of the things is, unless you have a great patent position so they just can't vary the formula, Matsushita can't come in, Panasonic can't come in and sort of drive you out of the market. A battery seems like a chemical technology to me, and it seems, you're right, I mean, if you've got a really great new battery, it's not a clean tech play, it's a smartphone play, right? That would be so you had a battery that was, so much better, performed so much better that an Apple came along and said, we'll take them because I'll get battery life 3x more by just plopping this thing in that I can make, again, relatively cheaply, right? So you've got to make the battery. You've got to make this thing, right? You've got to make it physically. You've got to make it. You've got to build a big factory to make these things. These are not made in factories that make 100,000 of these a day or a year, right? So you've got to build a big factory to make a battery, don't you? I'm not an engineer. My roommates were all chemical engineers, and my belief is that, how much does a battery factory cost? The one that Tesla's building, of course, that's for the big batteries, that's $5 billion. 5 to 10 billion. VCs can't come up with that. Startups can't come up with that, right? You might be able to partner, and you could think of all sorts of potentials. But so there's tons of potential in batteries. But the question is, for a VC, even if you come up with a better battery, it's unlikely to be 10x better. It's going to be 10% better, 50, 30, 20% better. And then you got to go somebody's got to build you $1 billion factory. Tough, right? That's the economics, right? So I'm not saying there's not opportunity. There's opportunity all over the place. But there's only specific opportunities that these kind of investors can do. Okay.
Hi. When you were talking about the low probability of government picking winners and the barriers that government puts into VCs getting involved in the field, I thought you made a pretty persuasive case for government not being involved in the field at all. And then if private firms can't figure a way to make a profit in this field using their own money at risk, doesn't that just indicate that the field itself is an economic black hole and that we ought to be concentrating on fields that can be operated profitably, by which I would mean fossil fuels and nuclear?
So my response would be, I think there are opportunities in this space. I think the government has a role in spaces, right? I think the SBIR program has worked over and over and over. All the research shows the SBIR program has worked. Small government investments, highly dispersed, right? NSF does SBIRs, NIH does SBIRs, DOE does SBIRs, right? Is a great way to seed the innovation that's coming from our population, but they need some capital to get started. And it's $1 million here, $1 million there. It's not a lot of money. So I believe the state does have a role. The state may have a role if we believe that global climate change is a problem, on creating an overarching sort of a carbon tax. Doesn't choose, just put a carbon tax on, and then you raise the cost of carbon pollution and you could allow innovators. Versus the Solyndra models, $500 million for her, and nothing for the rest. Well, how am I absolutely sure she's the winner and he's not, right? But I put all my bets there, so that would be sort of my response. I think there's a problem here. I believe that we have a serious problem. How we're going to create the policies, and what are the right policies, is the big issue. But there are opportunities. I mean, people have shown that there are opportunities in this space, and I think there'll be more. How do we encourage the creativity of the engineers in our population to do that? So I'm probably not going to say just get out. I'm going to say be very, very careful when the government does anything. That would be, I mean, the government was the internet, right? I mean, the government funded the internet at the beginning. That wasn't a bad idea. I don't think. I think it was a good idea, right? The government funded BSD Unix, right? The BSD Unix that underlies large parts of the internet. That was funded. The government funded UC Berkeley, Bill Joy, who then went on to start Sun Microsystems. Government funded that. NIH, Genentech, all the cancer drugs that we have, that was government funding in the universities for research. Right? There's a good use of government funding. What I'm more concerned is when the government goes out and sort of chooses a winner and pours a big bucket of money on them. But the government's been important. We wouldn't have the ICT revolution that we've had without government funding. I mean, it's just plain and simple. I mean, many of the early mini computers, the federal government actually went and helped, DARPA, somebody meant DARPA-E, went in and actually encouraged people to buy them. Right? Push Defense Department, oh, buy some of these DECs or scientific data system computers. Buy them. Well, you know, so, but I think we need a clever government, not a stupid government. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, what we get is the latter, the former rather than latter, or one or the other way around, but you know what I'm getting at. Anyway, thank you. Yeah, they seem to they went a little longer than we expected. Great talk. Yeah, thanks. Fun. Good question.